Hi everyone, I hope you are doing well. So we're back. We're going to do another video. Today we're going on a thrilling adventure about love gone wrong. This story is from the book Murder and Mayhem in Rockford, Illinois by Kathy Cressall. I will meet her in person one day because she does paranormal investigations around Rockford. But before we get into the story, I ask everyone to submit a scary story for the live Halloween stories in October. I made an email address so you guys can submit your stories. The email address is angelsadventures83@yahoo.com. Remember, these are going to be live storytelling of your guys' stories. Me and Ranbo have been discussing ideas, and he will also be a part of the live stories. We have a surprise, but we will save that until October 1st when we do the first live video. Thank you in advance for submitting your stories. Also, me and Ranbo took a short break from our podcast while I've been grieving the loss of my mom and now my grandfather. This has been really hard for me, the hardest part of my life, but I gotta stay busy. Busy hands, quiet mind. But anyway, me and Ranbo are going to start recording podcasts again, and I have plans for future videos with him as well. Now, let's get into today's story. Our adventure takes us to the story called Frozen Heart. Jacob Mayer was born in Russia on October 21st, 1897. He came to the United States in 1911, though he had no relatives in this country. His parents died in Russia, and his only brother was killed in the Russian army. When he was older, Jacob joined the United States Marines. While he was in Rockford, he roomed at the home of Peter Egchuk. We already know I messed that all up. At 1436 Nelson Boulevard. In 1924, he worked in Chicago but frequently traveled back to Rockford to visit his adoptive family. Jacob Mayer had been courting pretty Mary Ostrowski for 2 years, and they once talked of marriage. Mary Ostrowski was born in Russian Poland on June 26, 1905, and moved to the United States around 1914 with her family. Mary quit high school in 1923 and worked at Burson Knitting Company and the Nelson Hotel. She was only 16 when she met Jacob. The love affair had recently soured when Mary's parents disapproved of Mayer. Things came to a head in December 1923 when Mr. Ostrowski threw Mayer out of the house home at 246 Catherine Street. Jacob moved to Chicago to look for work. It was hard for Jacob to be so far away from Mary. Some days, instead of going to work, he would visit Rockford to see her. She would usually scold him for skipping work. Jacob had friends in Rockford, and they must have been keeping an eye on Mary for him. They told him that Mary had started to see someone new. The man was Stanley Barato, and he lived in Milwaukee. Mary wrote to Jacob to explain that her feelings had changed. She explained that she could not continue seeing him without her parents' approval. She was also honest about meeting another man. Jacob flew into a rage when he found out. Jacob wrote to Mary and tried to reconcile, but Mary was tired of the frequent arguments and let him know. Jacob's anger scared her, and she refused to see him for 2 weeks at the end of January and the beginning of February. Jacob came to Rockford on Sunday, February 3rd, to the Egchuk's house. I'm sure I've said their name wrong. There's letters in there they're probably not pronouncing. They were shocked to see him so depressed. Jacob spent Monday, February 4th, 1924, walking around Rockford. People seeing him, nervously pacing up and down the street, even when it started to snow. John Ostrowski, Mary's father, later explained to police that Jacob had made threats against Mary and her parents. The Ostrowskis' neighbors knew the situation and agreed to watch out for Jacob. It was around 7:30 p.m. when the Ostrowskis' neighbors, several blocks up on Catherine Street, noticed a man pacing the neighborhood. But a snowstorm turned into a blizzard, and the man had his head covered. They could not see his face to identify him. I mean, at this point, with everything going on, I would have just assumed it was that guy, especially back in like 1920s. Come on now, automatic. It's that guy. It's that guy. I'm gonna go out there and confront him. I know it's a blizzard outside, but this guy is crazy. And maybe if somebody would have did that, maybe the story would have been different. I mean, it might not have been good different. It might have been the person that tried to intervene got killed too. Who knows? Who knows? I mean, that's just one of them timeline scenarios, right? John Roskesko was a neighbor of the Ostrowskis and lived a few houses away on Catherine Street. He owned a store at the corner of Catherine and Seminary Streets. At 8:30 p.m. on February 4th, a phone call came into Roskesko's store. The caller requested that someone go to the Ostrowski house and ask either Mary or John Ostrowski to come to the phone. The caller gave his name as Stanley Barato, the new man that Mary was supposedly dating. Roskesko's store was only a few doors from the Ostrowski home, so he ran to collect Mary or John. John left the house earlier in the evening, so Mary said she would go. Roskesko's escorted Mary back through the snowstorm to his store. Mary rushed to the phone, no doubt excited to hear from Stanley. But when she picked up the phone, no one was on the other end. Mary waited a few minutes and then stepped into the snow to return to her house. Miss Conklin lived at 248 Catherine Street and stood at her front window watching the storm. She saw Mary walking quickly by her house. Then she saw Mary stop suddenly. Jacob was hiding under a tree, waiting for Mary's return. He stepped out from the shadows and, without saying a word, raised his .32 caliber automatic and shot Mary through the heart. She had just enough time to raise her right hand. The bullet shattered one finger on the right hand and pierced her heart. After seeing Mary fall, Mayer shot himself. He attempted to hit his heart, but the shot missed and lodged in his side. He clutched the gun and pressed the smoking muzzle to his forehead, right between his eyes. He pulled the trigger and fell across the body of his former sweetheart. Miss Conklin was the only witness to this horrible scene. She even saw the tiny flame from the muzzle's end. She summoned one of her roomers to accompany her and stepped out into the snow in her stocking feet. They were both horrified at the scene in front of them. Other neighbors heard the shots and came to join them. They found Mary was beyond help, but Mayer was gasping for breath. They recognized Mary at once and knew immediately what had taken place. They stepped back silently to make room for Mary's mother when she entered the blinding snow to find her daughter. They led her home when she became hysterical. A neighbor lifted Mary's body from the bloody snow and carried her into the house. The police and coroner were called. Captain Reed and his men made a careful investigation of the tragic event. The police checked Mayer's pockets and found another magazine for his gun. They also found a letter Jacob wrote explaining the reason behind his deed. Mayer wrote of his love for Mary and the promise of marriage that she broke. He described in great detail that he had to kill her. He noted that he was going to finish their love. The police believed that Jacob knew that Mary's father was visiting a neighbor and was not at home. Mr. John Ostrowski, Mary's father, was interviewed by Captain Reed and said, "I knew that something like this was going to happen. I thought for the last year that Mayer would try to kill me and Mary together." Mary Ostrowski's well-attended funeral was held at St. Stanislaus, Polish Catholic church near her home. A long line of cars followed Mary's body to the Catholic cemetery. Her friends and family were devastated by the loss, and Mary's mother could barely walk because she was so overcome by her grief. Jacob Mayer's friends had to make the arrangements for his funeral when coroner Fred C. Olson failed to find any relatives. His funeral was held in the home of the Ignatchuks. Miss Ignatchuk was so distraught over the murders that she had to be hospitalized. Mayer was buried in an unmarked grave in Cedar Bluff Cemetery in Rockford. And that is the end of that story, guys. As I mentioned, this is a story of love gone wrong. It is an unfortunate story. The guy lost everyone in his life, and then poor Mary tried to break things off, but it sent him over the edge. So 2 other things also stuck out to me. One being that he was buried at Cedar Bluff Cemetery, which we have been to. As a matter of fact, me and Randy had went there. But number 2 struck a chord in me. Fred C. Olson is the funeral home we used for my mom. They were so kind and compassionate, and honestly, I recommend them. I will never forget the people who did so much to help my family through those tough times. Our adventure ends here. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm glad you guys joined me. If you liked my video, give me a thumbs up. If you guys would like to see more videos like this, please subscribe. And as always, I appreciate you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.